Vasudevaya. So today we're reading from Canto 1, Chapter 3, Text 43, which is the right verse. And the chapter is entitled, Krishna is the source of all incarnations. And what I'll do first, we'll read the verse, and then we'll read the translation and the purport also. Okay? Krishna swadhamopagate dharma jnana dibi saha kalo nashta drishamesha puranarko dhunodita. Krishna swadhamopagate dharma jnana dibi saha kalau nashta drishamesha puranarko dhunodita. Krishna swadhamopagate dharma jnana dibi saha kalo nashta drishamesha puranarko dhunodita. Someone else like to repeat? Vaishnavis. Anybody else? Word for word translation. Krishna in Krishna's Swadharma, own abode. Upagate, having returned. Dharma, religion. Jnana, knowledge. Adibi, combined together. Saha, along with. Kalo, in the age of Kali, in the Kali Yuga. Nashta Drisham, of persons who've lost their sight. Esha, all these. Purana Arka, the Purana, which is brilliant like the sun. Aduna, just now. Udita, has arisen. Translation by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki. This Bhagavad Puran is as brilliant as the sun, and it has arisen just after the departure of Lord Krishna to his own abode, accompanied by religion, knowledge, etc. Persons who've lost their vision due to the dense darkness of ignorance in the age of Kali shall get light from this Purana. I think I should probably read the translation on my own first, so people can get the full. This Bhagavad Purana is as brilliant as the sun, and it has arisen just after the departure of Lord Krishna to his own abode, accompanied by religion, knowledge, etc. Persons who have lost their vision due to the dense darkness of ignorance in the age of Kali shall get light from this Purana. Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Lord Shri Krishna has his eternal dham, or abode, where he eternally enjoys himself with his eternal associates and paraphernalia. And his eternal abode is a manifestation of his internal energy, whereas the material world is a manifestation of his external energy. When he descends on the material world, he displays himself with all paraphernalia in his internal potency, which is called Atma Maya. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that he descends by his own potency, Atma Maya. His form, names, fame, paraphernalia, abode, etc. are not therefore creations of matter. He descends to reclaim the fallen souls and to re-establish codes of religion which are directly enacted by him. Except for God, no one can establish the principles of religion. Either he or a suitable person empowered by him can dictate the codes of religion. Real religion means to know God, our relation with him, and our duties in relation with him, and to know ultimately our destination after leaving this material body. The conditioned souls who are entrapped by the material energy hardly know all these principles of life. Most of them are like animals engaged in eating, sleeping, fearing, and mating. They're mostly engaged in sense enjoyment under the pretension of religiosity, knowledge, or salvation. They're still more blind in the present age of quarrel, or Kali Yuga. In the Kali Yuga, the population is just a royal addition of the animals. They have nothing to do with spiritual knowledge or godly religious life. They're so blind that they cannot see anything beyond the jurisdiction of the subtle mind, intelligence, or ego. But they're very much proud of their advancement in knowledge, science, and material prosperity. They can risk their lives to become a dog or hog just after leaving the present day, for they have completely lost sight of the ultimate aim of life. The personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, appeared before us just a little prior to the beginning of Kali Yuga, and he returned to his eternal home practically at the commencement of Kali Yuga. While he was present, he exhibited everything by his different activities. He spoke the Bhagavad Gita specifically and eradicated all pretentious principles of religion. And prior to his departure from this material world, he empowered Sri Vyasadeva through Narada to compile the messages of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And thus both the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam are like torchbearers for the blind people of this age. In other words, if men in this age of Kali want to see the real light of life, they must take to these two books only, and their aim of life will be fulfilled. Bhagavad Gita is the preliminary study of the Bhagavatam, and Srimad Bhagavatam is the summum bonum of life. Lord Sri Krishna personified. We must therefore accept Srimad Bhagavatam as the direct representation of Lord Krishna. One who can see Srimad Bhagavatam can see also Lord Sri Krishna in person. They are identical. Om Jnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Shurunmiritam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Padakamalam Sri Gurun Vaisnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So one of the most significant characteristics of a pure devotee, apart from their devotion for the Supreme Lord, is their compassion for the living entities. That's what ultimately ultimately makes them stand out, because of the level of compassion they have for the living entities. Because of their devotion for Krishna and their love for Krishna, they also feel the same amount of love for other living entities, because they can see other living entities as part and parcel of Krishna. And they can also see the spiritual reality. They know that the spiritual reality is a reality which is supposed to be devoid of anxiety, Vaikuntha. And knowing this, when they see other living entities suffering, they cannot tolerate them. Therefore, the term paradukha dukhi is there, that the pure devotee feels pain, the pain of other living entities, witnessing the suffering of other living entities. And one of the ways they try to mitigate the sufferings of other living entities is to discuss and engage in discussions on the pastimes of the Supreme Lord, so that a proper understanding the spiritual reality can also be presented, so that fortunate conditioned souls can hear those pastimes, and hopefully their love for Krishna will be reawakened. So many years ago, this is what happened at the onset of the Bhagavatam, this discussion here. The sages in the forest of Naimisharanya got together and were discussing various topics. And amongst those topics, 6 questions were presented. And each one of those questions was actually asked for the benefit of the living entity. What is the ultimate goal of life? What should one who's about to die do? These are all questions that people want answers to, right? People in this world act as if they're not afraid to die, but the reality is they are. That's why they spend so much time and energy accumulating all the facilities they have, because they're looking to extend the enjoyment they have. But deep down, there's this feeling that they know things don't last forever. But unfortunately, most people don't know how to address this fear. So the sages, the devotees, for the benefit of those living entities, have these discussions. And one of the questions asked was, what should one who's about to die do? What's the ultimate benefit for mankind? And tell us more about the pastimes of the Supreme Lord. And ultimately, now that the Supreme Lord is leaving the planet, where the religious principle is going to be taking shelter. So that was one of the questions being asked also. So throughout the first canto, This questions and answer session is going on, and the answers are given. So in this section here, on this verse 43, the answer to the sixth question, the sage's sixth question, which was, where did the religious principle go now that Krishna is left? Because you understand that Krishna being on this planet, he brings with him the spiritual reality. But now that he's gone, the spiritual world will return to its this original dark state. So how should the people in this material world know and find out about the truth, spiritual truth? How will they do that? So then the answer is given here that even though Krishna is gone, Krishna is left behind the Bhagavatam. Everything that the living entity in this material world needs to know will be found in the Bhagavatam. Right? So the verse says that persons who have lost their vision due to the dense darkness of ignorance in the age of Kali shall get light from the Bhagavatam. So here the Bhagavatam is being highlighted as the most important literature. Now this to the uninformed or the untrained hearer, this may come across as a very bold assertion. There are many literatures in the world, so why is the Bhagavatam specifically described as the topmost, right, where one should take shelter of the Bhagavatam? And this has to do ultimately with what the Bhagavatam contains. The knowledge that the Bhagavatam contains is incomparable, cannot be compared to any other literature, right? There's various types of knowledge that one can acquire in this world, but not all types of knowledge bring value to one's life. There are websites you can go to where they have all sorts of random information. Like if you want to find out how long a cockroach can survive after you cut off its head, there are websites full of information about that. There are websites that tell you what happens when you drop a raisin in a glass of wine. So this, to some people, this is also information, but it's not valuable information because it doesn't add any value to anyone's life. Right? Whereas the spiritual teachings contained within the Bhagavatam brings value to one's life because it deals with a spiritual reality. So therefore, real compassion means to give Bhagavatam to people, right? We see in the world in general, people are looking for all sorts of solutions. Recently, they just had the American election. I don't know who won the election. Who was it? Biden? Yes. So they go back and forth, going back and forth, picking one person, that person, because they're trying to find solutions. Before they picked Donald Trump, the situation was such that they felt they needed someone else, a fresh face. It's always the tendency of the materialists. Instead of dealing with the underlying issue, which is that we're suffering in this material world because we don't know how to interact with the material energy appropriately, what they do is try to make small tweaks. So a new leader. So now Biden is coming along, but it's only a matter of time before his inadequacies and his disqualifications become even more prominent. When Trump first came into power, Trump was held as the savior. He was going to make America great again, MAGA. But then shortly afterwards, Trump began to show his real colors, where he was exhibiting xenophobic tendencies and a clear, what's it called? A clear inability to grasp reality. Right? He was saying things which didn't make any sense. He basically was disqualified. He was not qualified as a leader. Right? And before Trump, the same thing was there. They had Bush. Bush also did the same stupid thing when he started the war. And then when Barack Obama came into power, for some people this was the big deal. The first black man in history to be the president of the United States of America. He was going to tell, this was turning over a new leaf. But then Barack Obama ended up making so many mistakes. So the Acharyas explained that no matter what the living entities do in this material world, they will never achieve happiness because these changes are like glossing over. It's not dealing with the essence, right? There are two types of solutions that one can generally take when one wants to deal with a problem. You can go to the root of the problem, or you can deal with a symptom. In medicine, it's referred to as a pathological solution or symptomatic solution. So for example, you have a spot on your face, right? So one doctor will give you like what's it called, ointment. Just put it on your spot and the spot will disappear. But one who knows that this is actually caused by something deeper, which is contamination in the blood, wrong diet, different things like that, they'll be able to help you deal with the problem in such a way that it will go once and for all, like an Ayurvedic doctor. Give you the right medicine to deal with the root of the problem. So the non-devotees are trying to find the solutions to the problem in this material world, but their solutions do not yield any long-lasting results, right? And what's worse is that their solutions actually make things much worse than when they first began, right? Whatever solution they come up with create more problems, right? So in order to improve the economy, improve the financial status of the nation, they come up with all these different industries. But the result of these industries is that they create pollution in the atmosphere, right? So whatever solutions they take up create more problems also. In medicine, this is called, there's a term I think is called Ayatrogenesis, which is basically means that it's created by the doctor himself. The doctor is trying to fix your health, but then he does things in such a way that the problem he tried to fix creates another health issue. Right? So we see this in history. I think you probably heard of the Cobra effect also, where in Delhi, the British, to deal with the fact that there were so many snakes around, then they started paying farmers or paying locals to kill the snakes, and every snake that a local will bring to them, they'll get some money for it. But then the clever and intelligent local people figured that if we're going to get money for dead snakes, then what they began to do is that they actually started breeding their own snakes so that they could kill them and then bring the money to the British government and then make more money, right? So this is the result of the solutions that the materialists take up in this world. Whereas the spiritualist understanding this, he goes deeper. So here the sages in the forest having a discussion regarding the solution to all the problem, and the Bhagavatam is given as that solution. And the reason why the Bhagavatam is given as that solution is the content of the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam talks about everything that one needs to know: who we are, what we're doing in this material world, what is the goal, and how to achieve that goal, like that. So we're spirit soul, and as long as we try to enjoy the material body, we'll never be satisfied, right? And the second reason given as to why the Bhagavatam is the one literature that one should take shelter of is that the Bhagavatam is not different from Krishna. Right? Prabhupada also explains that the Bhagavatam is an incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, for some people, this is difficult to comprehend, right? How can the Supreme Lord manifest himself also as a book? But it makes complete sense when you understand, when you accept the position of the Supreme Lord. In Gita, Prabhupada says that before you read the Gita, you have to theoretically accept that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because unless you do that, it will be very difficult to appreciate the rest of the contents of the book. So when one comes to the Bhagavatam, not having that theoretical foundation, that basis there, everything else that the Bhagavatam will say won't make any sense, especially the fact that the Bhagavatam is not different from the Supreme Lord. But how is the Bhagavatam not different from the Supreme Lord? Because Krishna is Sarva Shaktiman. Yeah, he possesses all potencies and all opulences. He possesses mystic potencies where he can manifest himself in any way he wants. So anybody who says that the Lord cannot manifest himself in a book form hasn't actually understood what it means to be the Lord. Because to be God means you have to have all potencies and you can do anything, anytime you want. Right? And also manifest yourself in the form of a book. So people have a difficulty understanding this principle. Sometimes they question how we can worship the deity when apparently it's just a piece of stone. How we show so much awe and reverence to a literature when apparently it's just a collection of pieces of paper bundled together. But the Lord has created this world, and the Lord can enter in any form He can, like that. So the Acharyas explain that the reason why the Lord does this is to give the living entity the opportunity to be able to connect with Him. Right? It's actually a manifestation of His compassion. Anyone who says otherwise is actually limiting the Supreme Lord. Right? But because of the Lord's compassion, the Lord can manifest Himself in any way. Just like one Acharya explained, just like an elephant who's very gigantic wants to make himself accessible to a child, because the child would like to see what it's like, wants to experience what it's like to touch and stroke the back of the elephant. Now, under normal circumstances, the child will not be able to do this because the elephant is too big and the child is just minuscule. Right? So for the benefit of the child, the elephant will kneel, crouch, so that the child can pat the elephant on the back. In the same way, the Supreme Lord makes Himself accessible to the living entities in the form of the deity, in the form of the books, right? So that we can also connect to Him. Because unless and until He does this, it's it is absolutely impossible for the jiva in this material world, especially the conditioned jiva, to appreciate the Lord. Right? The Lord may be present before them, they still won't appreciate Him. Where Krishna went to Mathura and Kamsa, in the assembly, and it's explained that when Krishna entered, different people were seeing Him, but they were all seeing Him differently based on their level of conditioning, right? The wrestlers saw Him as a competitor. Death personified he was seen as death personified by the demons. The local maidens, the ladies, saw Him as Cupid, like that, right? So based on the consciousness, one will relate to the Lord differently. So when one is conditioned, in the same way, one will what's the word? I want to find the right words, but it's not coming. But anyway, one will project his conditioning on the Lord, like that. Right? And this leads to offenses, and obviously there's no relationship there. So to facilitate that, the Lord makes it easier by coming in the form of the deity and coming in the form of the Bhagavatam. So by reading the Bhagavatam and following the instructions of the Bhagavatam, a living entity can appreciate the Lord more and more, become purified up until the point where they can actually appreciate the Lord's beauty fully. So when they enter the pastimes, when they come in contact with the pastimes of the Lord in the 10th canto, they can appreciate their value. Right? So there are many contentions given by people as to why the Bhagavatam should not be accepted. Sometimes people say that the Bhagavatam is illogical, right? Because the contents of the Bhagavatam do not make sense according to our mundane calculations. But if you understand where the Bhagavatam is coming from, the basis of the Bhagavatam, and you can also understand the position of Krishna, that the Bhagavatam is not illogical, the Bhagavatam is beyond logic. One devotee explains this as translogical, it transcends mundane logic, right? That the contradictions that one may come across in the Bhagavatam are only paradoxical, they're not illogical. A paradox means that on one level, it doesn't make any sense, but on a deeper level, it makes sense. And one needs the intelligence to understand it, right? So one of the contentions, for example, people have with the Bhagavatam is, like Bhagavatam is describing realms where there are mountains flying mountains, talking mountains, and things like that. But when one can understand how this material world is designed, then you can understand why this is possible. Because everything within this world, manifested within this world, has behind it a presiding deity, right? And the connection between the deity that presides over that element within this world is very intimate. So that deity can use that element to interact, right? So in that sense, you can have talking mountains, you can have flying mountains, right? So another thing, why is the Bhagavatam presenting like God as someone who acts in immoral ways, right? God is presented in the Bhagavatam, especially in the 10th canto, someone who engages in amorous pastimes with other people's wives. Why does the Lord engage in stealing the clothes of young girls, right? So on one level, on surface level, it appears to be immoral. So why should I accept the God that does this? And why should I accept the book that this God is giving me when he himself is not acting according to principles of morality? But again, when you look at it on a deeper level, it's completely immoral because the Lord is interacting with his own energies, right? The cowherd girls of Vrindavan are only the energies of the Supreme Lord. He's not stealing other people's wives. In fact, other people are stealing his wives by marrying them, right? Because they're his energies. And when he engages in these pastimes with these so-called wives of other people, it's for the pleasure of those jivas, because they want to interact with the Supreme Lord on that level. And there's nothing more pleasurable than the interaction between the man and the woman, right? So the Lord creates these circumstances so that the exchange of affection can take place. So if one does not have the right eye, one does not train the eye properly, they won't be able to understand it. So Prabhupada explains, Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena, right? When the eye becomes anointed with the salve of love, then one can appreciate the Supreme Lord. Up until then, it's impossible to do so. And up until then, one will remain unfortunate and unable to appreciate the Bhagavatam. They will spend their time and energy reading other sorts of books, like Harry Potter. They say that the Bhagavatam is illusory. The Bhagavatam is based on, is bogus. But then they spend millions and millions making this J.K. Rowling like a multi-millionaire book, buying a book where there's a boy who goes to a mystical place, a school for wizards, and to get to this school, he walks through a wall at a train station in London, and then he ends up in another realm. And in this realm, there are talking snakes, and he fights rats and all sorts of things. But Bhagavatam is bogus because there are talking mountains in Bhagavatam, right? They spend so much money going to the cinema to watch movies like Avengers or whatever, like the highest grossing movie of all time, I think. Maybe it's changed now. Spider-Man, where one boy gets bitten by a spider and then he develops these potencies where he can scale buildings just by putting his arm out like that, and then spider webs come out of it. So they say that the devotees, again, are trying to escape reality, but they're doing the same thing. They're also trying to escape reality, but the only difference between what the non-devotees and the devotees are doing is that their attempt to escape reality is actually keeping them further bound to illusion, whereas devotees are not tempted to escape reality. They're trying to get out of the illusion, right? Because we're not the body. This material world is not a natural environment. How do we know this? Because everything that happens in this material world, we don't want. Who wants to get old? Who wants to take birth? Who wants to get disease? Who wants to die? We can tell just by analyzing these things that this is not a natural environment. And how do we know that the spiritual world is real? Because we ourselves do not feel, we're not part of this place, So if we are spirit souls, and we don't belong in the material world, there's a complete, words keep escaping me. There's a contradiction between our nature and the nature of this world. Then where do we come from? We must come from a place where we feel at home, right? The spiritual world. Yes. And how do we know there is a spiritual world? We know there is a spiritual world because when you study all religious traditions, they may differ in terms of opinion, in terms of dress code, but they all agree that there is another realm, right? So that constant, throughout history is always there, right? So because of this, there are many other reasons, some of them escape me, but because of this, we know that we don't belong in this material world. Right? And how do we go to the place where where we belong to? By taking shelter of the scriptures, by taking shelter of the Bhagavatam. Even though on the surface level these scriptures appear to be illogical, there's a deeper layer. And one who's trained can understand how to go beyond this deeper layer. So the Acharyas are teaching that throughout the Bhagavatam. But first, before we take shelter of the Bhagavatam, we need to appreciate the position of Bhagavatam. So in this verse here, the position of the Bhagavatam is given where it's described to be like the sun which is arisen to illuminate the material world. And this analogy is very, very appropriate because of the position of the sun itself, right? The sun is very important to our material existence. Without the sun, we can't have light. Right? Without the sun, we can't have the moon, because it's explained that the light of the moon is basically a reflection of the sun. The sun's glow. Without the sun, we can't have fire. Right? Some of us say, yeah, fire comes from wood, but actually, the wood absorbs the rays of the sun through the process of photosynthesis, and then stores them. And then when put under the right circumstances, that potency manifests itself as fire, right? So the sun is so important, and in the same way the Bhagavatam is just as important. And unless and until one takes shelter of the Bhagavatam, they will never achieve the goal of life. So in Gita, Krishna says, Ya Shastra Virimusrija Vartate Kamakarata Nasasirima Vapnoti Nasukam Naparam Gatim. So one who doesn't have faith in the scripture will never achieve happiness in this world, and it will never achieve happiness in the next world, right? Because unless and until you take shelter of scripture, all you're left with is your mind. And what the mind will do is eventually take you down the wrong road. So now this is very important on that level, but it's also very important for us as devotees. The tendency sometimes when we hear these verses, and especially when the speaker spends a lot of time highlighting the inadequacies of the non-devotees, we feel, yeah, we're okay because we're hearing Bhagavatam. But actually, how many of us are actually hearing Bhagavatam as it should be heard? In the Bhagavatam, it's explained that one of the results of hearing properly is that one's heart becomes so cleansed that one is able to perceive the Lord directly. Yeah? Yes? Nashta prayeshu abhadreshu nityam Bhagavatam sevaya shrivantam swakata Krishna punya shravanam kirtana hridyantasto abhadrani vidunoti suri satam. And then it goes on and on and on. How many people can see Krishna directly? We may be hearing Bhagavatam for many years, but I don't know, at least for myself. I can sit here and say all these things because I've spent a good 10, 15 hours prior, hearing other people and taking all the masala and then putting it all in one pot, and then come in and then try to sprinkle it on the class to make it like appealing so that I look like I know what I'm talking about. But the reality is I don't have any taste for the Bhagavatam. I'm only doing this as a service. So why is it that despite all the time we spend hearing the Bhagavatam, we still don't get taste from the Bhagavatam? It all comes down to the fact that it's not just what you do, it's the way that you do it, right? You may spend many years sitting in the class. You may fall asleep in the class also. You're here in person. Your body is here, but where is your consciousness? Right? Prabhupada talks about real association, right? And he gives the example of the fly. The fly is buzzing around the face of the speaker, around the face of the sadhu, or the mosquito is biting the sadhu, so he's very close to the sadhu, but actually is the fly or the mosquito deriving the benefit or the association of the sadhu? Someone may say at one level the mosquito is because he's taking the blood and the blood contains Mahaprasadam and all that, but that's another discussion. The point is here, on one level, is the fly is getting the benefit? No, because the fly is simply causing disturbance. Proximity does not always equate to intimacy. Intimacy occurs when the heart is open to the teachings. And intimacy also occurs when one applies the teaching in a day-to-day life. So to the degree we hear the Bhagavatam, but we do not apply the teachings of the Bhagavatam in our day-to-day life, to that degree, we haven't actually heard the Bhagavatam. Because the purpose of the Bhagavatam is to create a change, as Prabhupada says. It creates a revolution in the misguided life of the living entities. So do we feel like there's a revolution in our life when we walk out of the Bhagavatam class? I don't know, maybe you might do, but I know I don't. I walk out the Bhagavatam class and quite often I feel sometimes unhappy that I spent an hour of my time listening to this guy saying the same thing over and over. I already know everything he said. Sometimes I feel unhappy that I spent an hour of my time listening to someone just being boring, just talking in a monotonous voice. Sometimes I come out of that class thinking, I should have been sat there. What? Are these the kind of people they're picking to give class nowadays? Mayapur is such a big place, so many great devotees, and this guy is the one they asked to come and speak. You know? That's generally what I walk out of class feeling like. Have I heard the Bhagavatam? No, because there was no revolution in my heart. The impurities were not cleansed from my heart. I walked out even more prideful. Right? So one Acharya explains that he gives the analogy that one who does not hear the scripture with the right consciousness is just the same as an owl when the sun comes up. Generally, it's explained that when the sun comes up, the owl becomes blind. So he may be in front of the sun, which is supposed to give light and facilitate sight for people, but this owl becomes even more blind when the sun comes up. So because the wrong consciousness is there, one is coming in contact with the Bhagavatam and become even more conditioned because the Bhagavatam only reciprocates with your conditioning, like that. So therefore, this verse is very important for us to remember. A lot of the time we tend to want to jump to other verses. We want to learn this verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sini, that verse from here, that verse from there, Tattva Sandarbha, Sat Sandarbha. And verses like this we skip because everybody knows this. I mean, like in Gurukul they teach you this when you're 5 years old. Krishna Swadama Pagate, Dharma Gyana Divi Saha, Kalonashta Deshameshan. You know, I know this verse already. But this verse contains so much insight that if we meditate on regularly, it will facilitate, it will help us because it will allow us to develop an appreciation for the Bhagavatam. And with that renewed appreciation for the Bhagavatam, when we come to Bhagavatam class, we'll derive the benefit of actually hearing Bhagavatam class. Without that appreciation, the Bhagavatam will not reciprocate with us the way he should. And the endeavor, in some respect, would just be Shrama Eva Hi Kevalam, complete waste of time. Maybe not complete, but a waste of time nonetheless. So this is a very, very important verse. Every single verse in the scripture is important, but this one is even more important because it gives you an appreciation of the scripture itself, right? And with that appreciation, whenever you read, you can have the right consciousness, and with that right consciousness, your transition through the scripture is smoother and smoother and smoother until you reach the 10th canto with a completely enlightened perspective on the pastimes of the Lord. And with that perspective, the Lord, being satisfied, will reveal to you the deeper aspects and give you the taste for devotional service. So I feel very grateful to have been given the opportunity to say a few words on this. There are so many things that could be said. I have like 4 or 5 pieces of paper. But you can have all the ingredients together, but if you don't know how to cook, there's no point. So I prepared whatever I could to the best of my ability, mustered up together a little dish. I hope it was satisfactory to your devotional and oratory palates. And if anyone has any contribution on how I improve my cooking skills for next time, then this is the opportunity to do so. Can I ask your questions or complaints also? Yes, Prabhuji. Yes, Prabhu. Thank you, Prabhu. Is it on my Quran? Can I ask you to speak again? Say that again, please, Prabhu. Yes.
In the translation, the purport Srila Prabhupada is telling about the pretentious type of religion.
Yes, Prabhu.
So can we say that apart from Bhagavatam, everything else which is there in the name of religion is pretentious?
Apart from Bhagavatam, everything else. When you mean apart from Bhagavatam, are you talking about Vedic literature or any other things?
I mean, just like in the context of the Ajamil, there was like a debate between the Yadutas and the Vishnudutas. Like Yadutas gave the one definition of the religion, and then Vishnudutas gave the Bhagavad definition of the religion. So in this way we find that in the Vedic context also there are like lots of things. There is a Bhagavad school of thought, then there is Karmkanda school of thought, then there is like a Shat philosophies, this type of philosophies, Nyaya, Vishishika. So can we say that apart from Bhagavatam, everything else which is coming, whether Nyaya, Vishishika, or although coming under the purview of the Vedic religion, but it is pretentious, can we say?
My understanding is that when Prabhupada is saying pretentious religion system is people or traditions that don't have as their goal love for the Supreme Lord, but present themselves as giving that, right? So there may be other paths that ultimately do not, like at least immediately do not bring one to God, but will eventually be like a stepping stone to bring one to the Bhagavatam. So in that sense, I wouldn't denigrate them or put them down such, because it's all based on the level of understanding and the level of consciousness of the person, right? Like the Vedas are like a big supermarket. So there are products that people can't afford. So you give them the best they can afford with what they have. So in that sense, I would say these other traditions, if someone is on those paths, sincerely looking, then eventually it'll come to the understanding of Bhagavatam. It's like a stepping stone. So it depends on what your definition of pretentious is. If pretentious is basically bogus, I wouldn't say so. But it's pretentious in the sense that it's masquerading itself as the pure thing when it is not. It's actually explicitly going out of its way to saying this is the essence. then that's what Prabhupada is speaking about. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm trying to, no, it doesn't. You're very generous, but I don't, does that answer your question, Jenny? If it doesn't, then please let me know, and we can.
Like in the Bhagavatam, like somebody will say like Bhagavatam is the best, the earlier work is the author, and the Rishi Munis are author, they will say that they are the best. Then if we go to some other like Ramayana, then Valmiki will say that Valmiki, Ramayana is the best. Sometimes this question comes up like every author is glorifying his literature. So it's like common psychology in that way. So in that way, like how Mayapur they don't market and their own arguments.
In that way, then yeah, you could say that it's pretentious, yeah, because it's not giving you the goal of religion. I guess I was trying to address the motivation behind the question, because sometimes devotees ask questions with the intent of finding faults with our traditions, whereas the Vedic tradition is all-encompassing and is there to provide platforms for different types of living entities. So generally, my tendency when I answer questions, I take all these things into consideration. So between us, you could say, yeah, categorically yes. But depending on who you're interacting with, then it's also they're bona fide paths, but they'll just take you longer to get to the goal. Bhagavatam takes you directly because everything is there. That's why when Vyasadeva was feeling dissatisfied, Narad Muni told him, you spend so much time going here and there, give the essence. So in that sense, Bhagavatam is, and anything else is pretentious. But what you could get also, you can get other literatures giving what the Bhagavatam is given, but not in the format of the Bhagavatam, but it's giving the essence also. Sometimes you get the message given in a different language according to the needs of the audience, right? Or according to the stage where they are. It is also a part of the Bhagavatam, but it's not giving everything the Bhagavatam is ready to give because people are not ready for it. So maybe I'm overthinking it, but I think there's more to it than that. Does that make any sense? Does anyone like to add anything else or contradict or correct me? I'm very much looking forward to it. Yes, Prabhu. Yeah, mic is there, you can use the mic.
Yeah, anything emanating from personalities who are not Krishna conscious should generally be avoided because it is coming from people who are eating cows, who are indulging in all the sinful activities, and so it will be adharmic. So my question is it a good good ideology or good perspective to try and keep one's distance from these kind of, let's say Stephen Covey, Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. It's all stuff he himself admits is coming, he picked up from the Bhagavad Gita, I heard. Okay, so why I'm asking this is because, to put things in perspective, is because at times devotees say, Prabhupada quotes Chanakya Pandit, saying that even if you get a bit of gold from a pile of garbage, take it. Okay, so in that sense, if that stuff is emanating from Stephen Covey, if you find something useful, take it, apply it. If you're getting something from Harvard Business Review or Bloomberg, take it and accept it. But in light of the fact that it is coming from people who are adharmic, there's a very, very big danger there. Okay, So, on the other hand, let us say a person has the right consciousness and firmly places their faith on the scriptures, on Srila Prabhupada's instructions, Vani, and then says, yeah, based on these literatures and Prabhupada's instructions, whatever best we can do, we'll do. So is that a good perspective? Is that understanding correct? That it is good to keep a distance from those kind of literatures or anything emanating from non-Krishna conscious sources? Is that okay? Or how do we strike a balance?
If you already have access to the Bhagavatam, then there is no need. But if someone does not have access to the Bhagavatam and they have more faith in that, and they're not initiated or committed to the process of devotional service, then to get them to the point where they could hear us and accept what we're saying, then the best we can do sometimes is to let them at least act in the mode of goodness. And some of these teachings are based in the mode of goodness. Right? But as a devotee who already has access to the Bhagavatam, unless it's for preaching where you need to speak a certain way, there's really no, it depends on whether or not you use it as a foundation for your life, as a guiding light by which you live your life, or do you just use it for research purposes? That's what it is. Like association basically means how open, how submissive are you to what you're in contact with. So a devotee for preaching purposes may read a book like that, but everything's being done from the mind. He's not opening his heart to it. Right? Whereas some other people, non-devotees who are coming, slowly coming, the heart is still not attracted to the devotional teachings, but at least they're coming from the mode of ignorance towards like time management or do unto others is, be kind to people. And that's good. It's better to have people being nice to each other than killing each other, because at least we can sit down and have a discussion with those people who are not killing each other. It's harder to preach to people who want to kill you. So in that sense, fine. But for someone who's coming from the devotional, there's everything is already here. And if we come across anything in the Bhagavatam that we're not able to translate in a way that our mind can appreciate it, then it's because we don't have the right association, because there's so many devotees within the Krishna Consciousness Society with different ways of looking at things, still based and founded on Bhagavatam, but they have different angles. So we find a devotee whose angle of vision or presentation style appeals to us, because at the end of the day we have to associate also with like-minded people, right? Because it makes it easier to take to the process. It's more the path of least resistance. So we should keep looking, and we'll find that we don't need to go out there, because like you're saying, ultimately these people may have stumbled across knowledge, but that's only because they're currently in the mode of goodness. But the problem is when you're not fixing pure goodness, the modes are fighting for supremacy. So one day you feel really enlightened, you walk past a beggar, they give a donation, oh, I'm so nice. Then the next day you see that person and they swear at you, because they're like that constant, which is Krishna consciousness, is not there. The mind is flickering like that. So I guess it depends who you are, who are we talking about here?
Thank you for that, Prabhu. Just in relation to that, from what you said just now, let us say, to narrow it down, it is in relation to devotee or devotees who are already like 10 years or 15 years or 20 years in Krishna consciousness, who know Bhagavatam is everything, who know Prabhupada's literatures are everything, and still parallelly, not out of any need, but just because they consider, Harvard has a big tag, Oxford has a big tag, so they read Harvard Business Review because it has a big tag. Okay, so is that, I don't want to say, should it be shunned upon, or I suppose that's not a welcome thing to do, isn't it?
Why are they using that tag? Where, when, how? Is it on the preaching leaflet?
No, not for preaching. It's just that
Do they sit on the Vyasa-san and say, you should listen to me because I'm a PhD from Harvard?
they just read it because they value it for its
They
tags.
just what? Sorry?
They go through that material because they value it. They value the tag. They value the brand value.
How do they express that? Is it like, yeah, I'm big PhD, or just they have a piece of paper and do they show it when they come to the Bhagavatam class? I don't-
They express it in their day-to-day interactions with devotees.
Another thing to take into consideration, my humble opinion is that, okay, we may have come in contact with the devotional teachings. However, until those teachings fully take root within our heart, like unless we're fully transformed, there are some things that we've learned in the mundane world that can be useful also, right? So sometimes this is always based on the context. Sometimes some devotees will say, okay, at least this guy had some training in management and consultancy before he came to the process of devotional service. So if you have two devotees who are neophytes, one had training in management and consultancy, but he wants to be Krishna conscious, he's sincere, and another one had no training in management and consultancy, and he's sincere. As the person who's giving people services, it will be wiser for me to go with a guy who has some kind of basic training in management, even though it's mundane, right? They're both trying to be devotees here. There's no one is more proud than the other. They're both sincere. Because the likelihood of him making a mistake is lesser. Now, if you have one who doesn't have that training but is sincere, and the other one has got some devotional flaws and he's puffed up, I'll go with a sincere guy who has no training because Krishna will empower him because the mood is right. So again, that's why I keep saying it's all based on the context. So some devotees will say certain things based on the context, just do that. But it's not like they're saying if they're not walking around with it. It's like they'll come through the gate and the security guard asking, Prabhu, and then Harvard University let me through, then it's all based on the context. That's my understanding of it, you know. Does that make sense? I think Prabhuji at the back had a question.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
So, yeah, like a major change in India. A major change,
Yeah.
in India was in the independence time, when India became independent. And at that time, they were looking for people to envision what India would be in the future. So, like many people came forward. Visionaries, very great scholars, visionaries. And one was Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo, people looked at him. He was a Cambridge graduate, highly academic. He wrote one famous book called The Synthesis of Yoga, where he tried to explain all the different yoga systems in India and make it simplified so the Western world would understand it, what India's was, because everybody was confused what was India, what was India teaching, and he wanted to synthesize it. So they chose him because he was highly academic, and
Yeah, please forgive me.
he was very intelligent, But one thing I just want.
What's the question?
There's no time, yeah?
No, it's fine. I'm just trying.
Okay.
If you have
So then, so they were looking at him, saying, "Well, what's India going to be in the future? What's the plan? And they chose him because he was academic. He was a Cambridge graduate, and like this is, and they really appreciated it. So he scaled consciousness. A person's consciousness, he scaled it into 9 to 12 different categories. And different categories, and it was correlated with the chakras in the body. And it was all his invention. He was just thinking, using his intelligence, working out everything, and at that time some devotees asked him, where is Krishna consciousness on your scale? And he said, Krishna consciousness is on the Agni chakra, or towards Agni, and it's like third chakra, like this. And it can go up to the third eye, like this. So he was speculating. And then one devotee asked him, what do you think about Krishna? What do you think about Krishna? Where does he belong in the consciousness? Because ultimately he's impersonal.
Yeah.
So he was thinking, what about Krishna? So then he made a statement. He's an impersonalist, but he made a statement that he said, because we have personality. He said it's from this it can be derived that the divinity, because he didn't know Krishna, he only said divinity, they only said divinity, nothing else, nothing personal. But he said, he said, because there's personality exists, it can be derived that there's personality in the divinity, and that's it. His whole book was like hundreds and hundreds of pages. There's probably one sentence that was personal, like that. It was in the Bhakti chapter.
So what's the
it's
just commenting?
Huh?
It's a comment, yeah. Just making a.
It's a comment, but also I have a question. One question also.
Okay.
How did they know that Shukadeva Goswami was qualified to speak? How did they know that he was the person who could enlighten people and like this?
They knew. They just knew. They just knew. If you know, you know. If you're pure enough, you can tell someone else is pure through their actions. And also his reputation preceded him, right? So the sages also knew about him. Because they said it, right? When they approached him to speak, they actually told him about his own qualifications, why he was the right person. So they knew. That answer your question? That's the answer I have. I don't know, anyone else has any other question? That's my understanding. They knew. And about this Aurobindo thing, because we have personality, then God also, it kind of makes sense. Yeah. Why would God create something that is not there also within him? Just like they say, good, bad, it's all there. It's just a different manifestation of the Lord. So why would an impersonal entity with all the limitation of impersonality create a personal entity which is more superior than itself, It doesn't make any sense. Right? So Prabhupada says that the reason why people like the impersonalistic philosophy, in some respect, there's many reasons, but one of the main ones, sometimes people are frustrated with personhood because of the pain and anxiety that comes with being a person. So they just want to kill personhood because they feel like if I'm having so much pain as a person, then it must be better to not be a person. But Prabhupada says that's because they don't know that it's possible to be a person and be pain-free, anxiety-free. So because they're speculating, So if this is like this, then the opposite must be like that. So therefore, I'm going to be attracted to the opposite. But there's so many other variations in the middle that you won't be able to figure out unless someone comes and tells you about them. That's the problem with mental speculation. So, yeah, it's nice he said that. I don't know so much about him, but I think that's a good conclusion to come to. God is also a person.
I think Prabhupada commented on Sri Aurobindo once. I'm not sure about this, but he said he was very close to being Krishna conscious. I think so. I think he commented on this because because he's trying to understand the truth. He's trying to, and he's using his consciousness. He's using his intelligence.
I have not read his teachings. I don't know so much about him. I just know of his name, and I know he wrote a couple of books while he was in prison. That's all I know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But based on that one statement you made there, at least at that time when he wrote it, it was on the money. I don't know about any other time. So I think we've gone over time. I'm going to stop here. Please forgive me for any discrepancies whatsoever, for going over time. Sometimes, question comes and I like to answer them. So thank you very much for your time, and Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki.